The twin sons of Kepler. 442b painted the sky in shades of orange and deep red as Dr. Ji-won Park knelt in the dirt, carefully scanning a cluster of crystalline flowers that seemed to hum with their own inner light. The year was 2847, and the research outpost in New Haven had become home to beings from across the galaxy. Humans, insectoid Valkyrie, reptilian Korvax, and dozens of other species lived and worked side by side on this distant world. But they all shared one unspoken rule: never disturb a Drakthor. The ancient creatures lived in the mountains that ringed the valley. They were massive beings with scales that looked like living crystal, bodies the size of starships, and eyes that burned like distant suns. Some said they had been here for thousands of years, long before any spacefaring race discovered this world. Others whispered they were older still, perhaps older than the stars themselves. Ji-won had been on New Haven for 2 years now, studying the strange plants and animals that thrive in the shadow of the Crimson Peaks. She had seen the Drakthor from a distance, unmoving statues perched on mountainsides, and like everyone else, she had learned to pretend they were simply part of the landscape. "Hannah, stay close, sweetie," Ji-won called out, glancing up from her work. Her 3-year-old daughter was supposed to be playing nearby with her toys, but the little girl had already wandered toward the perimeter fence. Hannah's dark hair caught the sunlight as she pressed her face against the barrier, one small hand pointing excitedly toward the mountains. "Pretty lights, Mama." Hannah squealed with delight. Ji-won felt her stomach drop. She followed her daughter's gaze and saw something that made her blood run cold. On the highest peak, the mountainside itself seemed to be glowing. Patterns of blue and green light rippled across the stone in waves, pulsing like a heartbeat. The eldest of the Drakthor, the one the scientists called Seratel, was moving. For 300 years, according to records, that dragon had not stirred. Some researchers believe it had died centuries ago and simply remained upright through some trick of geology. Others thought it had entered a state of hibernation so deep that it was indistinguishable from death. But now it was waking up. Alarms began shrieking across the facility. Ji-won heard Security Chief Dong-hyun Kim's voice boom through every speaker. Code Violet. Drakthor activity detected. All personnel maintain minimum safe distance of 5 kilometers. This is not a drill. Ji-won ran toward her daughter, but Hannah had already found a gap in the maintenance fence. The little girl squeezed through before her mother could stop her and began toddling up the rocky slope that led toward the mountains. "Hannah, no!" Ji-won screamed. But her daughter kept going, drawn forward by the dancing lights like a moth to flame. Other researchers poured out of the buildings, standing frozen in horror. Nobody knew what to do. The protocols were clear. Maintain distance. Do not engage. Do not provoke. But those protocols had been written with the assumption that the dragons would never wake. Through her communicator, Ji-won heard Dong-hyun shouting orders, coordinating with a diplomatic vessel that happened to be in orbit. The worst possible timing. Representatives from the Council of Ascended Races were visiting, and now they would witness whatever was about to happen. Ji-won ran after her daughter, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The rocky path was steep and treacherous, but fear gave her speed. She could see Hannah ahead, moving with the fearless determination that only toddlers possessed. The dragon's massive head emerged from the shadows of its cave. Serakel was even larger than Ji-won had imagined, easily the size of a spacecraft carrier. Its scales caught the dying light, each one a perfect crystal that seemed to contain galaxies within. Its eyes opened slowly, revealing depths of amber fire that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Every person watching held their breath. Every alarm fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Little Hannah reached the mouth of the cave and looked up at the towering creature. She was so small compared to the dragon that she barely came up to the tip of its massive snout, but she showed no fear. Instead, she smiled the pure, innocent smile of a child who had found something wonderful. She reached up with one tiny hand and placed it against the dragon's nose. For one heartbeat, the universe seemed to pause. Then slowly and possibly, the ancient dragon lowered its enormous head to the ground. The movement was deliberate, careful, and unmistakable. The massive body folded in on itself as Seratel bowed completely before the small human child. It was a gesture of submission, of respect, of recognition. Ji-won fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, she heard gasps and whispers in a dozen different languages. Somewhere in orbit, Ambassador Thelvira of the Velcari watched through her ship's cameras and felt her compound eyes widen in disbelief. On the mountain, Hannah giggled and patted the dragon's crystalline scales. "Nice dragon," she said in her small, cheerful voice. And then, for the first time in 300 years, Sarakel spoke. His voice did not come through sound but through thought, resonating in the minds of every living being on New Haven. It was ancient and deep, carrying the weight of millennia, but also something else, something that sounded almost like relief. Finally, the dragon's voice echoed in their consciousness. The waiting ends. Within hours of the dragon's awakening, the sky above New Haven filled with warships. Vessels from a dozen different civilizations appeared through jump gates, their weapon systems powered, but not yet active. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Everyone wanted to make sure their interests were protected. Ambassador Thelvira of the Velcari was the first to land. She was an insectoid creature, tall and graceful, with compound eyes that reflected light in rainbow patterns and long antennae that twitched constantly with her emotions. Right now, those antennae were vibrating with barely controlled fear. She strode into the research facility's main hall with a dozen armed guards behind her. Her voice, translated through a universal device, was sharp and urgent. "Dr. Park, your daughter must be separated from the Drakthor immediately. This situation is far too dangerous to allow it to continue." G1 sat in a corner of the room with Hannah in her lap. The little girl was playing contentedly with several small stones that glowed with soft blue light. Sarathel had somehow created them and given them to her as toys. They made pleasant chiming sounds when Hannah tapped them together. "No," Ji-won said firmly, holding her daughter closer. "The dragon hasn't hurt her. She's perfectly safe." Commander Dong-hyun Kim stepped forward, positioning himself between the ambassador and the mother and child. He was a compact man with sharp eyes and the calm demeanor of someone trained to handle crises. "With respect, Ambassador, the dragon hasn't harmed anyone. Perhaps we should listen to what it wants before we make any decisions." Thelvira's antennae flattened against her head in frustration. "You do not understand the significance of what has happened. The Drakthor have not moved in centuries. They have never, in all of recorded history, bowed to anyone. And now this child." "His name is Sarathel," Hannah interrupted cheerfully, looking up from her toys. "He's nice. He wants to talk to you." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. The child had spoken with such casual confidence, as if she were introducing a friend from the playground rather than an ancient being of incomprehensible power. Thelvira's voice softened slightly. "The dragon spoke to you?" "Uh-huh. He talks in my head. It tickles." Hannah giggled and went back to her toys. Dong-hyun exchanged glances with Ji-won. "Ambassador, if the dragon wants to communicate, perhaps we should go to him. Keeping our distance hasn't worked. Maybe it's time to try something different." The Velcari diplomat was silent for a long moment. Finally, her antennae lifted in what her species considered a gesture of reluctant agreement. "Very well, but I am coming with you, along with my guards. And if there is any sign of danger, then we run," Ji-won finished. "I'm her mother. I won't let anything happen to her." The group made their way up the mountain path as the twin suns began to set. Ji-won carried Hannah, who seemed completely unafraid. Dong-hyun led the way with a small security team, while Thelvira and her guards followed behind. The dragon's cave was enormous, easily large enough to swallow a building. The walls were covered in strange symbols that none of them recognized, carved deep into the stone. They glowed faintly in the dimming light. Saratel waited at the center of the cave, his massive body coiled around several crystalline pillars. His eyes fixed on Hannah, and the little girl waved at him happily. "Hi, dragon," she called out. The dragon's voice filled their minds again, that deep resonance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We are the guardians," Sarakel said, "placed here by those who came before. The forerunners, you would call them. They are long gone, but they left us with a purpose. To wait, to test, to find those who are worthy. Dong Hyun felt a chill run down his spine. Test? What kind of test? Every species that has come to this world, we have watched. We observed how you approached us, how you treated us, what you wanted from us. Thelvira's antennae drooped. She seemed to understand something the others did not. And we all failed, didn't we? The Korvax came with weapons, seeking to conquer us or destroy us. The Velkari came with rituals and offerings, seeking to worship us or use us. The Thren came with scientists and scanners, seeking to study us and take from us. The dragon's gaze swept across them all. Every species approached with fear or greed or ambition or reverence. All of these things corrupt the purity of contact. But not humans? Ji-won asked quietly, stroking her daughter's hair. This small one approached with only curiosity and joy. She touched me because she wanted to connect, not because she wanted something from me. She saw me not as a threat or a resource or a god, but as a living being worthy of kindness. Sarakel's enormous, I focus on Hannah, with something that might have been affection. She is the first in 6,000 years to pass the test. The weight of those words settled over the group like a heavy blanket. 6,000 years of waiting. 6,000 years of civilizations failing a test they did not even know they were taking. But why? Dong Hyun asked, why test us at all? Images suddenly flooded their minds. Not words, but visions. They saw a civilization of incredible advancement, beings of pure energy and matter who had mastered the secrets of the universe, the Forerunners, and they saw what had destroyed them, creatures that existed between dimensions, entities that fed on order and predictability. The Void Shepherds, Sarakel called them. They consumed civilizations by calculating their every move, by predicting their every strategy, by turning their own patterns and logic against them. The Forerunners had fought and lost, but in their final days, they had created the Drakthor and scattered them across the galaxy, living guardians who would wait for a species chaotic enough, unpredictable enough, creative enough to stand against the Shepherds. They are returning, Saratel said, and now there was urgency in his mental voice. The Void Shepherds sleep no longer. They are coming to this system. You're perhaps one moon's cycle before they arrive. Thelvira's legs nearly buckled beneath her. Her voice came out as a whisper. The Void Shepherds are supposed to be myths, stories we tell children. They were dormant. Now they wake. And if they are not stopped here, they will consume world after world until the galaxy is empty. Ji-won felt her arms tighten around Hannah instinctively. What do you need from us? From her? Sarakel's gaze softened. The child must become my voice. She must bond with me so that I can coordinate the defense of this world. Only through her innocence and your species' beautiful chaos can we hope to confuse the shepherds long enough to drive them away. Hannah looked up at her mother with wide, trusting eyes. Don't be sad, Mama. The dragon needs help. And friends help friends, right? Ji-won felt tears streaming down her face as she held her daughter close, knowing that everything was about to change and having no idea if any of them would survive what was coming. The news of what Sarakel had revealed spread through New Haven like wildfire. Within a day, the entire colony was divided. Protests erupted in the streets. Humans shouted at each other, their voices rising in anger and fear. She's just a baby. One woman screamed at a town hall meeting. We can't sacrifice a 3-year-old child to fight some ancient monster from a myth. But what if it's not a myth? A man shot back. What if those things are really coming? What if Hannah is the only chance we have? Dong Hyun stood at the center of the command room, feeling the weight of every decision pressing down on him. Messages flooded in from every corner of the colony. Some demanded that Hannah be hidden away and protected. Others insisted she had a duty to fulfill. The alien delegations were no better, each species arguing from their own perspective, their own fears. Lieutenant Hyun-woo Lee, Dong Hyun's second in command, looked exhausted. He had been coordinating security for 36 hours straight, without sleep. Commander, we should evacuate. Get everyone off-world before whatever is coming arrives. We have enough ships. Before what? Dong Hyun interrupted sharply. If the shepherds are real, if they're really coming, then running just delays the inevitable. Where would we go? How far we have to run before they caught up? Hyun-woo had no answer to that. Across New Haven, strange things began happening. The other Drakthor, the ones who had remained motionless for centuries in different parts of the planet, started to stir. A massive dragon emerged from the depths of the Western Ocean, water cascading off its crystalline scales. Another rose from a canyon in the southern desert. A third uncoiled itself from around a mountain peak in the frozen north. 6 more ancient beings, all waking after centuries of silence, all turning their attention toward Sereth Mountain, all waiting. In her laboratory, Ambassador Thelvira worked frantically through databases of Velcari history. Her people were among the oldest spacefaring races, and their archives went back thousands of years. Surely there would be something about the Drakthor, something about this bonding process Serakel had mentioned. She found in a restricted file, one that required the highest security clearance to access, a file her grandmother had made her memorize as a child, but told her never to speak of. The bonding process was real, and it was deadly. Thelvira's antennae drooped as she read the ancient text. Every species that had attempted to bond with a Drakthor had failed. The Velcari had sent their greatest warrior 5,000 years ago. He had died within minutes, his mind unable to handle the vast consciousness of the dragon. The Thren had tried with their most advanced telepaths. They had fallen into comas and never awakened. The pattern was clear. Adult minds were too rigid, too structured, too set in their ways. They broke under the weight of a Drakthor's ancient memories and power. But a child's mind might be different. Flexible, adaptable, still learning how to shape itself. It might work, or it might kill Hannah just as surely as it had killed all the others. Thelvira found Ji-won in her quarters that evening. The doctor sat on the floor with her daughter, playing a simple game with blocks. Hannah was building a tower, laughing each time it fell and starting over again. "Dr. Park," Thelvira said softly, "may I speak with you?" Ji-won looked up, and Thelvira could see the fear and exhaustion in the human woman's eyes. "You found something." "Yes, the bonding process Serakel mentioned. It is real, but it is dangerous. Very dangerous." Thelvira explained what she had learned, watching Ji-won's face grow paler with each word. "So she might not survive," Ji-won whispered. "Her mind is young and flexible. She has a better chance than any adult would. But I cannot promise she will live through it." Thelvira's voice was gentle. "I am sorry. I wish I had better news." Ji-won pulled Hannah into her lap and held her tight. The little girl squirmed and giggled, not understanding why her mother was suddenly so sad. That night, as Hannah slept, Ji-won sat by her daughter's bed and cried. She thought about running, about taking Hannah and getting on a ship and fleeing to the farthest corner of the galaxy. She could change their names, hide, keep her daughter safe. But then what? If the shepherds were real, if they really were coming, then nowhere would be safe. Not for Hannah, not for anyone. The next morning, Dong-hyun received an urgent alert. Korvax warships had broken formation and were descending toward the planet's surface. What are they doing? Hyun-woo demanded. The answer came quickly. A Korvax strike team had landed near the research facility under cover of darkness. Their mission was simple: kidnap Hannah and force one of their own warriors to undergo the bonding instead. War Chief Rekthar, the Korvax commander, believed that if a dragon-bonded warrior fought for the Korvax Empire, they would become unstoppable. He did not care about protecting New Haven or stopping the shepherds. He only cared about power. The strike team made it halfway to G1's quarters before every light in the facility went out. Then the ground began to shake. Serakel's roar split the night sky, a sound so powerful that windows shattered and people fell to their knees. The ancient dragon's massive form appeared above the facility. His crystalline scales blazed with light that turned night into day. A single blast of energy from the dragon's maw struck the Korvax dropship, turning it into molten metal that rained down on the empty landing pad. Dong-hyun security forces found Rekthar and his team cowering in a corridor, their weapons dropped, their faces showing pure terror. The Korvax were fierce warriors, but even they recognized a predator beyond their ability to fight. "Get them off this planet," Dong-hyun ordered coldly. And tell their fleet that the next ship that tries something like this will not be given a warning. The Korvax retreated, but the damage was done. The galaxy now knew that the Drakthor were not sleeping monuments. They were weapons, and they were very much awake. In the medical bay, Dr. Youngmi Han prepared her equipment with shaking hands. She was New Haven's chief physician, and if the bonding was going to happen, she would need to monitor Hannah's vital signs throughout the process. Ji-won, she said quietly to her friend, if we go through with this, I need you to understand that I cannot guarantee your daughter's safety. The neural stress alone could. I know, Ji-won said, her voice barely a whisper. I know what could happen. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Hannah wandered into the room, still in her pajamas, carrying her favorite stuffed toy. Mama, why is everyone so sad? The little girl asked. Ji-won knelt down and took her daughter's hands. Sweetie, Sarathkael needs your help. But helping him might be scary. It might hurt. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. Hannah thought about this seriously, her small face scrunching up in concentration. Then she looked up at her mother with clear, determined eyes. But, Mama, Dragon is my friend, and friends help each other when they're scared. That's what you always tell me. Ji-won felt tears streaming down her face as she pulled her daughter into a tight hug. On the edge of the star system, deep space sensors detected strange readings. Spatial anomalies were forming, growing stronger by the hour. The summit of First Light stood at the highest point of the Crimson Peaks, a plateau carved from pure crystal that had existed since before any species had come to this world. It had always been empty, a place too sacred for living beings to tread. But now, 7 massive Drakthor circled above it, their wings casting shadows that made the ground below seem to pulse with darkness and light. The air itself felt heavy, as if reality was struggling to contain so much ancient power in one place. Every breath took effort. Every step forward felt like pushing through invisible water. Representatives from every species on New Haven watched from observation, post-kilometers away. Cameras transmitted the scene across the galaxy, to a world where people held their breath and waited to see what would happen to the small human child who had touched the untouchable. Ji-won carried Hannah up the final steps carved into the mountainside. Her legs ached and her arms trembled from the weight of her daughter and the strain of the climb, but she refused to let anyone else carry the little girl. If this was going to happen, she would be there for every moment of it. Dong-hyun walked beside her, his hand never far from his weapon, even though he knew it would be useless against what waited above. Youngmi followed close behind, her medical scanner constantly monitoring Hannah's vital signs, watching for any sign of stress or fear. Ambassador Thelvira climbed with them, her insectoid legs better suited for the steep path than human limbs. The council had demanded a witness, someone to record what happened for the historical archives. She had volunteered, feeling somehow responsible for what was about to unfold. Hannah seemed to be the only one who was not afraid. She hummed a cheerful tune and waved at the dragons circling overhead. Pretty dragons, she said happily. They reached the summit as the twin suns began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The crystalline platform stretched before them, perfectly smooth and covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Forerunner script, Youngmi realized, a language older than any living civilization. Sarathel waited at the center, his massive body coiled around pillars of crystal that rose from the platform like trees. His scales caught the dying light and reflected it in 1,000 directions. His eyes, those burning amber eyes, fixed on Hannah with an expression that might have been hope. The other 6 Drakthor landed around the edges of the platform, forming a circle. Their combined presence made the ground vibrate with deep, resonant hum that Ji-won felt in her bones. Last chance, sweetie, Ji-won whispered to her daughter, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. You can still say no. Nobody will be angry. Nobody will blame you. Hannah reached up and patted her mother's cheek with one small hand. It's okay, Mama. Dragon needs me. I'm not scared. Ji-won kissed her daughter's forehead, tasting salt from her own tears. Then she stood and let Hannah walk forward on her own small legs. The little girl approached Sarathkael without hesitation. She looked so tiny compared to the massive dragon, barely reaching the height of his lowered head. but she smiled up at him with complete trust. "Hi, Dragon. I'm ready." Sarakel's mental voice was gentle when it filled their minds. "You are brave, small one, braver than warriors who have lived 1,000 years. Place your hands upon me, and we shall begin." Hannah reached up with both hands and pressed them against Sarakel's crystalline snout. Light erupted from the point of contact. It was not harsh or blinding, but warm and soft, like sunlight filtering through water. It spread from Hannah's hands up her arms, across her small body, until she glowed like a star. Young Me's scanner went wild, alarm shrieking, neural activity spiking. Ji-won, her brainwave patterns are completely off the scale. Synchronizing. Thelvira breathed, her compound eyes reflecting the light. By all the ancestors, she is actually synchronizing with him. Ji-won started forward, maternal instinct overriding everything else, but Dong-hyun caught her arm. "Wait! Let her finish. We have to let her finish." It was the hardest thing Ji-won had ever done, standing still while her daughter underwent something that could kill her. Every muscle in her body screamed to rush forward, to pull Hannah away, to protect her, but she forced herself to wait. Inside Hannah's mind, the world transformed. Memories flooded through her like a river, thousands upon thousands of years of experience. She saw the Forerunners in their prime, beings of such grace and power that they seemed more like living art than creatures of flesh and blood. She felt their joy in discovery, their pride in creation, their love for the universe they explored. Then she felt their fear. The void shepherds came like darkness swallowing light. They were beings that existed between cracks of reality, in the spaces where dimensions touched. They fed on order, on predictability, on the patterns that all civilizations created. They would calculate every possible move a species might make, and then they would consume those possibilities one by one until nothing remained. The Forerunners had fought with weapons that could shatter stars. They had used technology that bent space and time itself. But every strategy they employed, every tactic they tried, the shepherds predicted and countered. The more ordered and logical the Forerunners became in their defense, the easier they were to consume. In the end, the Forerunners realized they could not win, but they could prepare. They created the Drakthor, living weapons seeded across the galaxy, and they designed them with one purpose: to find a species that did not rely on order and predictability, a species that embraced chaos, a species that could adapt and improvise and change direction on a whim, a species like humanity. Hannah felt Sarakel's consciousness merge with her own, 3 centuries of waiting and watching flowing into her young mind. She understood now why he had bowed when she touched him, not because she was special or chosen, but because she had approached him with genuine curiosity and kindness, nothing more and nothing less. She had not tried to use him. She had simply wanted to be his friend. The light began to fade. Hannah's hands dropped to her sides, and she swayed slightly, but she did not fall. Her eyes opened, and they were still her eyes, still the bright and curious eyes of a 3-year-old child. But there was something else there now, too, something ancient and wise lurking in their depths. She turned to her mother and smiled her usual bright smile. "Hi, Mama. I'm okay. Dragon says we're friends now, for real friends." Ji-won rushed forward and swept Hannah into her arms, holding her so tight the little girl squeaked in protest. "Can't breathe, Mama." Young Me checked her scanner, her hands shaking. The neural patterns are stable. They are actually stable. She survived. She actually survived the bonding. Thelvira's antennae were standing straight up in shock. In 6,000 years of recorded history, no one had ever survived a full bonding with a Drakthor, and this child had done it as easily as making a new friend on playground. Then every alarm on New Haven began screaming at once. Dong-hyun's communicator exploded with panicked voices. "Commander, multiple spatial rifts opening at the system's edge. We have contact. Unknown entities emerging from subspace." The void shepherds arrived like tears in the fabric of reality itself. They were not ships or creatures in any normal sense. They were wrongness given form, entities that existed in too many dimensions at once. Looking at them made eyes water and minds ache. Trying to understand their shape was like trying to count the edges of a shadow. 3 of them emerged from the rifts in space, each one larger than New Haven's moon. Their presence alone was enough to cause chaos. Ship computers crashed as they tried to calculate geometries that should not exist. Navigation systems failed. Communication arrays went silent and then screamed back to life with nothing but static and whispers. In the operations center, Dong Hyun stood before a wall of screens showing the approaching horror. His hands were steady on the console, but his heart raced. Around him, officers from a dozen different species worked frantically to coordinate the defense. "All defense fleets, hold position," he commanded, his voice carrying across every channel. "Wait for the signal." Lieutenant Hyunwoo looked at him with wide, desperate eyes. "What signal, Commander? What are we waiting for?" Dong Hyun did not have an answer. He only knew that Hannah and Sarakel had told him to wait, to trust them. It went against every military instinct he had, but he had learned that sometimes the best strategy was to have no strategy at all. On the summit of First Light, Hannah stood between her mother and the massive form of Saratel. Her small hand rested on the dragon scales, and through that touch, she could feel the thoughts of all 7 Drakthor. They were ready. They had been ready for 6,000 years. Around them, structures began rising from beneath New Haven's surface. Towers of crystal and metal, ancient Forerunner installations that had been hidden underground since before any living species had evolved. They hummed with power that made the air taste like lightning. "Mama," Hannah said, her voice carrying both her own childish tone and Sarathel's ancient resonance. "I need you to trust me. Tell everyone to stop following plans. Tell them to just do what feels right. Tell them to be human." Ji-won looked down at her daughter, at this little girl who had somehow become something more, and nodded. She activated her communicator with shaking hands. "Dong Hyun, you need to broadcast this on every channel. Hannah says everyone should stop following protocols. No more tactical plans. No more formations. Just let people do what they think is best." There was a long pause. Then Dong Hyun's voice came back, and Ji-won could hear the uncertainty in it. "You're asking me to throw out every military procedure we have, to tell trained soldiers to just improvise." "Yes," Ji-won said firmly. "That is exactly what I am asking." Dong Hyun closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened the broadcast channel to every ship, every soldier, every pilot in the defense fleet. "All forces," this is Commander Kim, "disregard all tactical protocols. Disregard formation orders. You are authorized to engage at individual discretion. Trust your instincts. Do what you think is right." The military commanders thought he had lost his mind. Some demanded clarification. Others questioned his authority. But the human pilots, they understood. Grins spread across faces. Laughter crackled over the comm channels. Finally, one pilot named Sori Jung said with fierce joy, "We get to fly like humans instead of like machines." The Void Shepherds reached New Haven's orbit, and reality warped around them. They extended tendrils of force that existed in multiple dimensions at once, probing the planet's defenses. Their alien intelligence calculated every possible response, every standard tactical formation, every logical strategy that might be employed. Instead, they encountered absolute chaos. Human fighters broke formation immediately. Some dove straight toward the shepherds with reckless abandon. Others looped in random spirals. A few started flying backward for no apparent reason. One pilot began playing music over the open channel and started doing barrel rolls in time with the beat. The shepherds tried to calculate the pattern, to predict the next move, but there was no pattern. Every pilot was making independent decisions based on instinct and creativity, and sudden impulses that even they did not fully understand. The Korvax forces, watching this madness, slowly began to break their own rigid formations. The Velkari, who had always fought with perfect coordination, found themselves improvising for the first time in their military history. "They cannot predict us," Soare shouted as her ship corkscrewed through impossible angles, dodging tendrils of force that tried to grab her. "We do not even know what we are going to do next." On the ground, Hannah and Sarakel merged their consciousness fully. The little girl's flexibility and the dragon's immense power became one entity, and through their connection, all 7 Drakthor awakened to their true purpose. They were living weapons, designed by the Forerunners to channel the chaotic energy of an entire planet. And New Haven's most chaotic element was humanity itself. The Forerunner installations fired beams of pure energy, but not with calculated precision. They fired wildly, unpredictably, sometimes missing entirely, and sometimes hitting with devastating accuracy. Seracael and the other 6 dragons flew through the spaces between dimensions, following the shepherds into realms where physics worked differently. They harried the massive entities wherever they tried to stabilize and feed. But it was not enough. The shepherds were too large, too powerful, too ancient. One of them adapted to the chaos, its vast intelligence finding patterns even in randomness. It extended itself toward New Haven's eastern continent, preparing to consume everything there. Millions of people would die in minutes. Young me, watching from the medical bay she had converted into a command post, had a sudden insane idea. G1, I need you to broadcast something for me. What? G1 shouted over the noise of battle. Tell everyone on the planet to do something completely random in the next 30 seconds. I do not care what, just tell them to do something without thinking. G1 did not question it. She opened every communication channel on New Haven. This is Dr. G1 Park. Everyone listening, I need you to do something random right now. Dance, sing, jump, whatever you want. Just do it without planning. Do it now. Across New Haven, the response was immediate. Children abandoned their shelters and started playing games in the streets. Adults began singing songs from 100 different worlds. Someone started baking bread for no reason. A Velcari diplomat, caught up in the moment, began juggling pieces of fruit. Korvax warriors composed spontaneous poetry. A group of humans started having a water balloon fight. Millions of beings, all acting without purpose or pattern or logic. Pure, beautiful, chaotic life. The combined energy of all that randomness, all that unpredictability, surged through the planet. Hannah and Serathale channeled it through the Forerunner network, amplifying it, focusing it into a wave of pure chaos that struck the Void Shepherds like a tsunami. The entities recoiled. Their calculations failed. They could not feed on something that had no order to consume. They could not predict beings who did not even know what they would do next. Hannah's voice rang out, amplified by 7 Drakthor and powered by the life force of an entire world. You wanted predictable prey. But we are not prey. We are messy and weird, and we make no sense at all. And that is what makes us alive. The 7 dragons struck as one, their combined might channeling the planet's chaotic energy into a focused assault. The Void Shepherds, unable to adapt to something so fundamentally unpredictable, began to retreat. They fled back through the dimensional rifts they had created, unable to process or consume what they had encountered. As the last shepherd vanished, the rift sealed behind them, and silence fell across New Haven. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then cheering erupted from every ship, every building, every corner of the colony. 3 weeks later, G1 sat in the facility garden and watched Hannah play. Her daughter was drawing with crayons again, creating simple pictures of flowers and stars and dragons. She was mostly just Hannah now, a normal 3-year-old girl. But sometimes when she laughed or smiled, G1 caught glimpses of ancient wisdom in her eyes. Serathale had returned to his mountain, but he spoke freely now with anyone who wished to visit. The other Drakthor remained awake as well, scattered across the planet as guardians. Thelvira approached G1, her antennae relaxed and peaceful. The Council has made a decision. Humanity will be recognized with a special designation. They are calling your species the Chaos Bringers. G1 laughed. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It is the highest honor we can give. Thelvira's mandibles curved in what might have been a smile. Other worlds with Drakthor guardians are waking. The dragons are calling for humans to come, to bond with them as Hannah bonded with Serathale. Hannah looked up from her drawing and waved. Mama, look, I drew us. G1 knelt beside her daughter and saw the picture. A small child holding hands with a massive dragon, surrounded by stars and flowers. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, Hannah had written, Friends Forever. High on his mountain, Serathale watched the sunset with eyes that had not known hope in 300 years. Across the galaxy, wherever Drakthor waited in darkness. They began to wake and watch the stars, waiting for the chaotic, wonderful, impossible humans to find them. And in the garden, a little girl hummed a happy tune while she drew pictures of dragons and dreamed of adventures yet to come.